Seven Men from Now wasn't just another Randolph Scott Western. It was a brutal, psychological landscape where grief was a loaded gun and justice was a ghost in the desert. This was the film where a legendary star's production company nearly buried a genius script, where a haunted actress's real-life addiction bled into every frame, where a future superstar villain was so magnetic he nearly burned the whole production down. What audiences saw in 1956 was a taut 78-minute masterclass in tension. What they didn't know was that behind the camera, a young screenwriter was fighting for his soul, a director was protecting a fragile star, and an entire new brand of Western was being born in the blistering heat of the Alabama hills. This is the full story of Seven Men from Now, the film that was too dark for its time, too smart for the box office, and too perfect to be forgotten. Here are 13 weird facts about the Western that defined grief on the big screen, and stick around for a bonus fact about the corporate partnership that secretly shaped its story. Hit that subscribe button and let's ride out. Number 13. Gail Russell's haunted performance. Gail Russell wasn't just acting in Seven Men from Now. She was living out her own private tragedy on camera. By the time she was cast as the vulnerable Greer, Russell had been largely absent from Hollywood for 4 years, her career derailed by a severe and well-documented struggle with alcoholism. Director Boetticher and star Randolph Scott were taking a massive risk, but they saw a fragility in her that was perfect for the role. It wasn't a case of method acting. It was a battle with personal demons that played out in every trembling take. Crew members from the production recall Russell often arriving on set shaky and disoriented, requiring immense patience from Boetticher, who would sometimes spend hours just talking to her quietly before she could face the camera. Scott, a gentleman to his core, treated her with profound kindness, never showing frustration. What audiences see on screen, her wide, fearful eyes, her delicate, hesitant movements, isn't just performance. It is the raw, unfiltered portrait of a woman on the edge. Boetticher later stated that casting her was both the best and most difficult decision he made on the film, creating an on-screen authenticity that no script could ever write. Her haunted presence elevates the film from a simple revenge tale to a profound study of shared trauma. Number 12. The screenwriter's brutal first draft. Burt Kennedy's first draft of the Seven Men from Now screenplay was so stark and violent that producer Harry Joe Brown of Renown Productions almost rejected it outright. Kennedy, a young writer making his feature debut, had crafted a script devoid of the usual Western tropes. There was no comic relief, no romantic subplot, no clear-cut heroism. It was just 77 pages of cold, hard revenge and simmering tension. Brown, a veteran producer, argued it was too bleak, too short, and too downbeat to sell. He wanted Kennedy to add a cheerful sidekick, expand the romance, and give Ben Stride a more heroic, less ambiguous motivation. Kennedy refused. A massive argument erupted between the writer and the producer, with Kennedy threatening to walk away from the project. It was star Randolph Scott and his partner, John Wayne's Batjack Productions, who ultimately saved Kennedy's vision. They recognized the script's lean power and overruled Brown, insisting the film be made exactly as Kennedy wrote it. This battle was crucial. It established the Ranown Cycle aesthetic, a minimalist, adult, and psychologically complex brand of Western that directly challenged the more optimistic fare from Hollywood's golden age. Kennedy held his ground, and in doing so, he didn't just save his script, he helped redefine an entire genre. Number 11. Lee Marvin's scene-stealing rebellion. Lee Marvin wasn't supposed to be the villain. He was initially offered the role of the good-natured cavalry officer, but Marvin read the script and knew where the real power was. He demanded to play Bill Masters, the charming, amoral gunman. When the producers hesitated, Marvin, already a formidable character actor, laid down the law. He would only do the film if he could play the villain. His instincts were dead on. From the moment he appears on screen, Marvin doesn't just act, he erupts. He brings a playful, menacing energy that completely upends the film's dynamic. His scenes with Randolph Scott crackle with a homoerotic subtext that was radical for 1956, a dance of admiration and antagonism. Marvin wasn't just reading lines, he was rewriting the film's power balance with every smirk and every lazy, confident gesture. Bud Boetticher gave him the freedom to improvise, and Marvin ran with it, creating one of cinema's most memorable villains. He so dominates his scenes that Scott's stoic hero seems almost passive in comparison. This wasn't just a great performance, it was a hostile takeover, a demonstration of how a truly charismatic antagonist can overshadow the protagonist and redefine the entire narrative. Marvin didn't just steal his scenes, he hijacked the movie's soul. Number 10. John Wayne's shadowy producer role. John Wayne's name doesn't appear in the credits, but his presence looms over Seven Men from Now like a mountain. Wayne was a partner in Batjack Productions, the company co-producing the film with Randolph Scott's Ranown Productions. Wayne's involvement was a double-edged sword. On one hand, his star power and business acumen helped get the film financed and greenlit. He had immense faith in Scott and in the potential of this leaner, darker style of Western. On the other hand, Wayne's heroic persona was completely at odds with the film's morally ambiguous tone. He reportedly had major reservations about the bleakness of Kennedy's script and the ending, where the hero finds no real peace. Wayne preferred his westerns with clearer moral lines and more triumphant conclusions. While he didn't actively interfere with Boetticher's direction, his behind-the-scenes influence created a subtle pressure. The film exists in the tension between Wayne's old-school heroism and the new, cynical vision Boetticher and Kennedy were creating. It was a Batjack film that Wayne himself could never have starred in, making it a fascinating artifact of a Hollywood in transition, a film produced by an icon who was already being left behind by the very art form he was helping to create. Number 9. The censored opening's intended brutality. The opening of Seven Men from Now is famously impressionistic. We see a Wells Fargo office, a flash flood, and Ben Stride's wife dying. But what audiences saw was a compromise. Bud Boetticher and Burt Kennedy originally scripted a much more graphic and direct opening. They wanted to show the robbery in progress, with the outlaws coldly herding passengers and executing them before the flood hits. This would have left no doubt about the evil of Stride's targets and the righteousness of his quest. However, the Production Code Administration, the Motion Picture Association censors, balked. They argued that showing such explicit murder at the outset was too brutal for a general audience and would earn the film a restrictive C rating from the Catholic Legion of Decency. Faced with the potential of a commercial death sentence, the producers capitulated. Boetticher was forced to re-edit the opening into the more ambiguous, poetic sequence we see today. The result is arguably more artistically compelling, but it fundamentally changes the film's moral grounding, turning a straightforward revenge mission into a more ambiguous psychological journey. The censorship didn't just trim a scene, it reshaped the entire film's meaning. Number 8. The Ranown Cycle's accidental masterpiece. Seven Men from Now was the fourth film in the Ranown Cycle, a series of 7 low-budget westerns starring Randolph Scott and produced by his company, Ranown Productions, often in partnership with John Wayne's Batjack. But this film wasn't planned as a cornerstone of a legacy. It was a fast, cheap production designed to fulfill a contract and turn a quick profit. The creative team director Bud Boetticher and writer Burt Kennedy were still relatively unknown. They had collaborated on previous Scott westerns, but Seven Men from Now was where they finally achieved a perfect synthesis of their talents. It wasn't a grand artistic statement. It was a group of craftsmen working at the top of their game under tight budgetary and time constraints. They shot in just 18 days in the Alabama hills, using the natural landscape as a character and embracing the limitations of their budget to create a lean, focused narrative. The film's minimalist style, its sparse dialogue, long silences, and moral ambiguity was born from necessity, not just artistic choice. This accidental masterpiece ended up defining the entire Ranown cycle, becoming the template against which all the other films are measured. It proved that artistic greatness doesn't require a big budget, just a great script, a visionary director, and a star willing to disappear into a role. Number 7. The theme song's hidden meaning. The film's memorable theme song, sung during the opening credits, isn't just a catchy tune. It is a narrative device that contains the entire movie's thematic core. The lyrics, written by Burt Kennedy himself, tell the story of a man riding from the sea who has 7 men from now to kill. On the surface, it is a simple revenge ballad. But listen closer. The song establishes the clock ticking down on Ben Stride's quest, creating a sense of inevitable, fateful momentum. The phrase "from now" is crucial. It is not just a number. It is a measurement of time, a deadline for both justice and damnation. The music, composed by Leigh Baxter, is equally important. It is not the triumphant, soaring score of a traditional Western. It is a melancholic, almost mournful melody that underscores the tragedy of Stride's mission, not the glory. This musical choice was deliberate. Boetticher and Kennedy wanted to signal from the very first moments that this was not a celebration of violence, but a lament. The song primes the audience to view Stride not as a traditional hero, but as a man trapped by his past, riding toward a future that offers no solace, only the hollow completion of a terrible task. Number 6. The Lone Pine location's psychological power. The decision to film in the Alabama hills near Lone Pine, California, was a masterstroke of psychological storytelling. This wasn't just a convenient Western backdrop, it was a landscape that mirrored the protagonist's internal state. The jagged, weathered rocks and vast, empty spaces create a feeling of profound isolation and desolation. Boetticher uses the harsh, unforgiving terrain as an externalization of Ben Stride's grief-stricken soul. The characters are constantly framed against this immense, indifferent landscape, emphasizing their smallness and vulnerability. The heat, the dust, the endless horizons, it all contributes to a sense of purgatory. Stride isn't just riding through a desert, he is navigating the wasteland of his own memory. Furthermore, Lone Pine was the site of countless previous westerns. By using this familiar location, Boetticher was able to subvert audience expectations. He takes the iconic John Ford country and drains it of all romance and heroism, leaving only a stark, brutal reality. The Alabama hills and 7 Men from Now are not a promised land. They are a graveyard, and every rock formation looks like a tombstone marking the death of Stride's former life. Number 5. Randolph Scott's reinvented stardom. At 58 years old, Randolph Scott was supposed to be a fading star. 7 Men from Now was part of a deliberate strategy to revitalize his career and move him away from the more conventional, romantic westerns of his earlier years. Scott, along with his producer Harry Joe Brown, specifically sought out more complex, adult-oriented material. They weren't just making another movie, they were engineering a late-career renaissance. Scott embraced the new aesthetic with discipline and commitment. He shed his familiar cowboy persona and became Ben Stride, a man hollowed out by loss. His performance is a masterclass in minimalism. He conveys immense emotion with the slightest narrowing of his eyes or a subtle tensing of his jaw. He allows his co-stars, particularly Lee Marvin and Gail Russell, to have their big moments, content to be the stoic, tormented center around which their chaos orbits. This wasn't the ego of a traditional leading man at work. It was the confidence of a veteran actor secure enough to let the character's silence speak louder than any action. Scott's transformation in this film and the others in the Ranown Cycle created a new archetype. The aging, introspective Western hero, a direct precursor to the anti-heroes that would dominate the genre in the 1960s. Number 4. The French New Wave's Secret Love. While 7 Men from Now was a modest box office performer in the United States and quickly forgotten by mainstream audiences, it was hailed as a masterpiece by the critics of the French New Wave. Directors like François Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard saw in Boetticher a director with a distinct personal vision, a filmmaker who used the constraints of the Western genre to express profound philosophical ideas. The French critics were captivated by the film's moral ambiguity, its visual rigor, and its rejection of Hollywood sentimentality. They praised the purity of Boetticher's style and the existential nature of Scott's character. For them, 7 Men from Now wasn't just a B-movie Western. It was high art, comparable to the best works of Ford or Hawks. This critical re-evaluation in France was instrumental in the film's eventual rediscovery and canonization. Decades later, American critics would look back and agree, but it was the French cinephiles who first recognized the film's genius when it was new, rescuing it from obscurity and cementing its status as one of the greatest westerns ever made. Number 3. The ending's devastating ambiguity. The ending of 7 Men from Now is one of the most quietly devastating in film history, and it was a point of major contention. After Stride kills the last of the men responsible for his wife's death, he is left alone with Greer and her husband. He has his revenge, but there is no satisfaction, no peace. He simply turns and walks away into the desert, a man with no purpose left. The original script and some of Boetticher's initial ideas included a more explicit resolution. One version had Stride explicitly giving Greer the reward money, another had him sharing a final, meaningful look with her before leaving. But in the final cut, all of that is gone. The ending is stark and open-ended. Stride doesn't say goodbye, he doesn't acknowledge anyone, he just vanishes. This ambiguity was exactly what made the film so powerful for its admirers and so frustrating for its detractors. Producer Harry Joe Brown lobbied hard for a more conclusive, hopeful ending, arguing audiences needed closure. But Boetticher, supported by Scott and Kennedy, held firm. He understood that for a man defined by a quest for revenge, the completion of that quest isn't a victory, it is a void. The film's refusal to offer easy answers is its ultimate strength, leaving the audience with a haunting sense of loss that lingers long after the credits roll. Number 2. Lucien Ballard's isolating cinematography. The film's stark, psychological power is inseparable from the work of cinematographer Lucien Ballard, a master of light and shadow. Ballard doesn't just photograph the Alabama hills. He uses them to imprison the characters. He frequently employs deep focus, keeping characters in the sharp, unforgiving foreground while the vast, empty landscape stretches out behind them, emphasizing their isolation and the futility of their journey. In the climactic gunfight in the Rocky Canyon, Ballard's camera doesn't move with frantic energy. It is static, observant, almost dispassionate, framing the violence as a grim, inevitable ritual. His use of harsh, direct sunlight creates deep, unyielding shadows that seem to represent the character's inner darkness. Look closely at how he lights Randolph Scott. Often, one half of his face is illuminated while the other is lost in shadow, a visual representation of a man divided between his duty and his despair. Ballard's cinematography isn't decorative, it is the film's primary language. It creates a world of moral and emotional emptiness, a visual purgatory from which there is no escape. He didn't just light the set, he painted a portrait of a soul in torment. Number 1. The punishing 78-minute runtime. 7 Men From Now runs for a razor-sharp 78 minutes. This brevity wasn't an accident, it was a weapon. In an era when many westerns pushed past 2 hours, Boetticher and Kennedy made a conscious decision to strip their story down to the absolute bone. There is not a single wasted scene, not an ounce of extraneous dialogue. The film's relentless pace mirrors Ben Stride's own obsessive, single-minded quest. There is no time for sentiment, no space for distraction. The moment Stride achieves his goal, the film ends. It doesn't linger on the aftermath or offer a resolution. It just stops, leaving the audience as empty as the hero. This structural choice is what makes the film so modern and so devastating. It rejects the comforting narrative arc of traditional Hollywood storytelling in favor of something far more honest and unsettling. The 78-minute runtime transforms 7 Men From Now from a genre picture into a clinical case study of obsession. It is a sprint through hell, and by the time it is over, you're left breathless, understanding that for a man like Ben Stride, the end of vengeance isn't peace, but simply the end. The clock runs out, and nothing is won. Bonus fact: the real Wells Fargo connection. The entire plot of 7 Men From Now is set in motion by a Wells Fargo robbery. What is largely unknown is that the production received an unprecedented level of cooperation from the actual Wells Fargo company. In the 1950s, Wells Fargo was actively engaged in a public relations campaign to burnish its historic image and associate its modern banking business with the rugged reliability of its Old West counterpart. When they learned about the film, they saw a perfect opportunity. They didn't just grant permission to use their name, they opened their corporate archives to the filmmakers. Burt Kennedy and Bud Boetticher were given access to authentic 19th century ledgers, wanted posters, and detailed accounts of actual stagecoach robberies. This historical accuracy is woven throughout the film, from the specific details of the robbery to the procedures for tracking down thieves. In a unique arrangement, Wells Fargo even had a representative on set during filming to ensure the historical portrayal met their approval. This wasn't just product placement, it was corporate-sanctioned mythology building. The company was so pleased with the final result that they used stills from the film in their own advertising for years, implicitly linking the film's themes of relentless pursuit and eventual justice to their own corporate brand. 7 Men From Now didn't just use Wells Fargo as a plot device, it became an official part of the company's legend. 7 Men From Now endures not as a relic of a bygone era, but as a timeless study of the human heart in conflict with itself. It is a film born from a perfect storm of creative alchemy, a star willing to fade into the shadows, a writer who bled truth onto the page, and a director who saw the soul of the West in its empty spaces. Every frame is a testament to the power of minimalist storytelling, proving that the most profound emotions are often found not in words, but in the silence between them. The film's initial failure and subsequent resurrection by critics and cinephiles is its final, fitting irony, a story of justice delayed, but not denied. Bud Boetticher and Randolph Scott set out to make a simple Western, but they accidentally created a poem of grief and redemption that still resonates today. The lesson of 7 Men From Now is that sometimes the longest journey isn't across the desert, but the one a man takes back to his own haunted past.